Okay, we start. Good afternoon from Brussels and welcome to the launch of the Global Market Outlook for Solar Power 2024-2028. This webinar will last an hour and it's a free webinar hosted by Solar Power Europe. My name is Raffaele Rossi. I'm head of market intelligence at Solar Power Europe and I will be the host for the day. We have many exciting news coming from this report and a lot of topics to discuss. So let's go through the packed agenda that we have for the next hour. After these welcoming words, I will give the floor to my colleague Christoph Lietz for an overview of the main findings of the Global Market Outlook 2024. Then we also have a number of guest speakers. This year's GMO focus is on the China market, and we will have Collins Nyamatadfo, Senior Policy Analyst from the Global Solar Council, who will present highlights from the PV market in China. After that, we will also delve into the European region, where I'll present some insights from our learnings from Europe. And after that, we'll also have an exchange with Sonia Dunlop, the CEO of the Global Solar Council, discussing the policy recommendations provided by the GSC for this report. But before we start, let's have a look at the next slide, just for you to know that the report is available online for free download and consultation. You can check it on our website, or you can scan the QR code and get your free copy. I will stop here for the time being, so I'm glad to introduce Christoph, who will be presenting the main findings of the GMO this year. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raffaele, and welcome everyone from my side also. So as Raffaele just mentioned, I will be the first speaker for today's webinar, and I will present the key findings that we have on the Global Market Outlook. My presentation will be done in three steps. The first one, we will actually look at the 2023 installed capacity, because that's where we are starting the analysis from the report, and then we'll move towards more the outlook and what we're expecting from the rest of for the rest of the years to come until 2028. But without further ado, let's jump right into the topic. And what has happened in 2023 is an enormous growth of 87% from 2022. So the world in total installed 447 gigawatts across the globe. So there was an enormous growth that was actually triggered by a couple of factors that we can highlight. And maybe the first factor that comes into mind to us is actually the in terms of the industry on manufacturing and the different supply chain trends that we've seen over the past years. The strongest one, I'll say, is really the increase of the manufacturing capacity that we have observed across the year in 2023, which has resulted in a sharp decrease in terms of module price. So over the course of the year of 2023, the module prices have actually dropped by almost 50%. This has made module and solar component more affordable than ever, and a lot of installation came as a result of that. So that's the first factor. The second factor we observed a lot also in certain regions is that there is still some delayed impact from the global energy crisis from 2022 and 2021. So what we've seen is that, especially at the beginning of 2023, a lot of household, residential, and small commercial were still facing high electricity prices, and that drove their decision to invest into solar PV in general. So those are the two key factors that actually allowed PV to grow that much, from about 239 gigawatts in 2022 to 447 in 2023. However, one thing needs to be highlighted, that a lot of that growth actually was happening in one country, and it's China, both on the manufacturing side, but also on the installation side. So when we're actually looking at the solar world in general, today we're actually seeing two solar worlds, I will say. So on the graph on the right, you have actually the annual installation in China, and then on the right side, the annual installation of the rest of the world, meaning all the countries except China. And what we can observe is that really China is a leader on its own. So last year, in 2023, the country installed 253 gigawatts of solar PV. That's more than 150% growth from year to year and really marked a new era for the country. So we can also realize that basically in 2023, China installed more solar PV capacity than the whole world actually did in 2022 when it installed around 230 gigawatts. So just by itself, China really entered a new era. And if you look at the rest of the world, so the rest of the world installed 194 gigawatts, so that's still a 35% growth, which a lot of industry will actually jealous of such growth rates. And if you look a little bit at how did 2023 perform compared to our expectation, we see that for the rest of the world, actually, we were expecting the world to install 200 gigawatts. So we are just 3% lower than our forecast, our anticipation. On the other hand, no one has foreseen China to become that big. So we had forecasted about 140 gigawatts to be installed in 2023 in China, and it turned out much bigger than that, to be over 250 gigawatts. So in general, today, when we're seeing the market, there's really two worlds which are appearing. First, China, and then the rest of the world, which are both growing at two different paces. But maybe let's move on a little bit from the very global picture, and let's look at what are the key markets outside of China also that really played a role in 2023. So I will not cover development of China here at the moment because our colleague from the Global Solar Council will do it just later in this webinar. But if we look at the global composition of the top 10 markets, actually we see not so many changes in terms of who is in the ranking. The only notable change is Italy actually now at the 7th place, replacing Poland, which was another European market. But if we look within the ranking, there's been some shift with some country going up, going down, but we're most of the time finding some of the same actors. So if I will start with the second position, the United States actually performed really well. They had their best year ever for solar PV with 32.4 gigawatts installed, or from 21.9 gigawatt a year before in 2022. The reason for that is that there was some easing of the different trade of module coming into the country. Some imports and export was actually difficult in 2022. That situation has eased a bit, or actually developers were more used to it. But also 2023 was the first full year of implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, which really provides a new framework, a stable ground for development of renewable and of PV, which has also enhanced the manufacturing capacity in the country. Then on the third spot, we actually have Brazil, which is an impressive growth over the past couple of years, and which has reached now 15.4 gigawatts of installed capacity in 2023. Both segments, so the distributed segment and the large-scale segment, have actually grown quite impressively in the country. We had some doubts looking a year before because some change in the net metering rules might have reduced a little bit the distributed capacity, but it turned out not to be the case, and the segment still was very strong in 2023. And then looking at the top 4 and top 5, so we have Germany and India, which are the two other countries which have installed more than 10 gigawatts in 1 year in 2023. But both countries have had very different evolution over the year. On one side, we have Germany, which has almost more than 100% growth. The market doubled in 2023 compared to 2022. This is partly due to a lot of policy being implemented, also some impact from the energy crisis, new tenders, new large objective for the country in terms of installation. And it's the second year in a row that Germany is actually surpassing the government target, which was set at 13 gigawatts in 2023, and they have reached 15 gigawatts. And on the other side, as I was mentioning, India had a bit of a disappointing year because the market actually shrunk a little bit from 17 gigawatts in 2022 to 12.5 gigawatts in 2023. The utility scale segment was a bit struggling with some delays, and at the same time, the rooftop market is not picking up as fast as it could. One thing that's important to mention here when we're discussing the number of India is that here we're looking at numbers from January to January, so January 2023 2023 to January 2024. So really the calendar year and not the financial year or the fiscal year that in India happens from March to March, which might have seen different results and actually an improved of the solar PV market. So that's just one point to notice. But then if you look at the rest of the ranking, the countries were already there in the previous year, except for Italy, as I mentioned, and maybe the only country that might be worth to look a bit at is Japan, which also shrunk a little bit compared to 2022 by about 300 megawatts. This is mostly due to the fact that the country is still in the transition phase from the feed-in tariff era that it had to actually developing new business model for a large-scale PV. But we still have some positive growth for the country. So in general, what does it lead to in terms of cumulative installation? So in total solar PV installation, the world at the end of 2022 had 1.2 terawatt of installed capacity, and we are now at 1.6 terawatt capacity, a little bit above. That is just really the flip coin of the huge growth we have seen in 2023. But more interestingly than the whole capacity as a whole, it's interesting to see at how that is segmented between region actually. And what we've seen at the end of 2023 is that really the solar PV capacity was more concentrated than ever. So here the graphs you have is actually the share of each region in terms of cumulative solar PV capacity share from 2017 to 2023. So we have regions such as Europe, Americas, APAC is including all the Asia Pacific without China. Then we have China as a region of its own, and then we have MEA standing for Middle East and Africa. And what we've seen is that the growth of China in 2023 really expanded its market share, which now which stood at 40% of all installation at the global scale were in China, which is a 6% improvement for 34% a year before. So of course, because of the growth of China, most of the other region actually lost market share, even though some region actually improved their annual installation. But starting from the biggest drop in 2023 is actually the Asia Pacific region, with accounting without China. That region actually lost 4% of market share, mostly because some countries were a bit underperforming, such as India and Japan, that I've already mentioned, but also South Korea, whose policy has become a bit less supportive of renewable, actually leaning a bit more toward nuclear at the moment. And then following, we have Europe and the Americas region, which have both lost 1% of global market share in terms of cumulative solar PV installed capacity. Nevertheless, both regions actually improved their annual installed capacity. Europe reached about 70 gigawatt of installed capacity of annual market from about 50 a year before. And the Americas also improved by about 38% in terms of annual installation. And then the last region we have is actually the Middle East and Africa, which is the only region that managed to increase actually the global market share. This is mostly due to a couple of countries, namely the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which have both grid connected some of the largest PV plants in the world. We're talking about the gigawatt scale PV plants, and also the South Africa, which has connected quite a lot of PV in the past year, which was also a bit driven by several power cuts and sort of power outage in the country, which has actually driven installation in South Africa. And so that was in terms of what has happened in 2023, which is really the starting point for analysis looking in the longer run. So what can you expect for 2024 and up to 2028, and even a small teaser to 2030 actually. So what do we have in store for 2024? That actually we're expecting the market will grow by 22% in 2024. So growing from 447 gigawatt to 544 gigawatts. So over half a terawatt of installation in a year. And then looking a bit further in time, up to 2028, we're expecting the market to grow, but at a slower pace, so around 12 to 13% in the next years. And that will reach to about 876 gigawatts of of annual market in 2028. Of course, we know that a lot of this will actually depend on China. So at the moment, if we look in our forecast up to 2026, China is still holding about 50% of the annual installation share. at the global level. Nevertheless, there's still a lot of growth actually coming from other countries, and we have several reasons to think about it. That first of all, the manufacturing industry will still face oversupply in the coming years, meaning that products and especially modules will remain at quite low price and will become fairly available for most of the industry. And then lastly, also there's a momentum that was gained during the energy price crisis with a lot of energy security concern coming on the top of a lot of political agenda. And of course, the climate crisis actually not going anywhere at the moment. So we have a couple of reasons to actually believe that the market could increase a bit further if we factoring all those inputs, so the low manufacturing, the high manufacturing capacity leading to low manufacturing price. Our scenario can actually go up to 647 gigawatts already this year and going up to 1 terawatt by the end of our forecast, so by 2028. It's actually a huge improvement compared to our forecast the year before. If we look, of course, at the flip coin of it, again, so we, at the end of 2023, the world ended up at 1.6 terawatt of installed capacity. We're expecting the world to be at 2.2, almost 2.3 terawatts by the end of this year. And looking a bit further in time, by 2028, we are expecting about 5.1 terawatts of cumulative installed capacity across the globe. But maybe more interestingly, so our forecast, our outlook and market scenarios goes always for the 5 years to come. But we've been tempted to actually do a small exercise and do an extrapolation of our medium scenario by just 2 extra years to see where does it land in 2030, as the year is quite a landmark year for a lot of policy and a lot of climate objective. And so what you're seeing on the left is actually the annual installation of solar PV across our 3 scenarios, so the low scenario in blue, the medium scenario in orange, and the high scenario in yellow. And what we're seeing is that in our medium scenario, we are already reaching 1 terawatt of solar PV installed per year, starting from 2029, compared to 1 terawatt only in 2028 in the high scenario in our 5-year outlook. So if we look back a couple of years ago, when thinking about 1 terawatt by 2030 was actually something enormous, we are saying that we might actually have reached that. We will reach that, but probably even earlier than 2030. And of course, that development leads to quite ambitious installed capacity in the long run. So by 2030, we're expecting about 7.4 terawatt to be installed in total across the globe. And that puts us on the most ambitious scenario when we are being compared to other solar analysts. So if we look to the forecast from IRENA, so the International Renewable Energy Association, they are forecasting 5.5 terawatts, which is almost 2 terawatts lower than our own forecast. And if you look at the most ambitious scenario that we've seen for 2030 comes from BNEF, so Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and they're standing almost 1 terawatt, even more than 1 terawatt lower than our forecast. And to give a bit of a glimpse of what kind of PV talking about here, and that will be my last slide actually before coming to the key takeaway and the quick conclusion. So I want to have a brief discussion about what PV are talking about in terms of rooftop PV and utility scale PV. So in the past couple of years, so in 2021, 2022, rooftop PV actually increased a lot because of the energy price crisis. So the electricity price was actually really high, and that was a huge driver for household and small commercial to install. In 2023, this has shifted a little bit because the electricity price went back to relatively normal price. So the main driver behind the growth of rooftop was a bit lower, and rooftop increased from 196 to 196 gigawatts, which is about 44% of market share. So dropping a little bit from the 50% share we had in 2022. On the other side, we have the utility scale solar sector, so the large scale plant built on ground. Our segmentation is that utility scale is any farm larger than 1 megawatt built on ground. That segment was actually on a strong growth path last year, mostly because of a lot of delays in the supply chain that were resolved, and also the low module price. So the market increased to 251 gigawatts and actually gained a bit of market share. So from the 50% share we had in 2022, they increased to about 56% market share. And if we're looking a bit forward, we're expecting in general utility scale solar will grow faster than rooftop PV, and utility scale solar will reach almost 0.5 terawatt by 2028. So we'll have 0.5 terawatt of new installation on the ground by 2028, and that will cover about 59% share of the annual market. So almost a 60-40% share for utility compared to rooftop. So, and that will lead me to actually the key takeaway of the report is that you will notice that we are quite ambitious in our forecast, but we believe we have a lot of reason to be so actually. So when we look here on the graph, you have on the left the installation in terms of watt per capita per region. And what we see is that we have a lot of region. We still have quite a lot of room actually to improve and to develop solar PV. A lot of countries have not yet actually started this solar journey. The global average for watts per capita is at 202, and only a handful of countries actually above that. And among those handful of countries, only a couple actually really leading the way, with Australia, Netherlands, and Germany being close to 1 kilowatt of installed capacity per country. And then on the right side, we have actually the electricity generated in 2023. So what's the share of PV in the electricity generated? So that's the last bar on the right. And we see that solar only accounted for 5% of the electricity generated in 2023. And there is still 70% of electricity that was generated by non-renewable source of electricity. So there is still 70% of electricity generation that still needs to be covered. And within that race to cover the 70%, solar is actually long ahead of the other renewable technologies. So if we see in here, we're showing the picture about out of all the renewable installed capacity that was installed in 2023, more than 75%, so actually 78% of those were solar PV. So there is a lot of room still to cover, and solar is actually ahead in that race to cover that 70% of electricity that remains to be covered. So that was it for me for the key highlight of the country. If you have any of the report, sorry, if you have any question, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll be happy to actually answer it at the end. And with that, I'm leaving back the floor to Raffaele to continue the webinar.
Right. Thank you very much, Christophe, for being on time and presenting the highlights of the GMO, at least at the global level. So you touched upon the impressive growth that has been taking place in China, and this is why I would like to call Collins on stage to give an overview of what's going on with solar PV markets in China. Collins, the floor is yours.
Raphael, good day to everyone. My name is Collins Nyamadzao. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Global Solar Council. And we were part of the Global Market Outlook report that was done. And upon realizing that China had constituted more than 50% of the growth that happened in 2023, I think it necessitated a deep dive into what exactly was the China situation, where they were growing their solar market exponentially. This is the part where the Global Solar Council also contributed a chapter in it. I think we contributed 2 chapters, the one for policy recommendation and a focus on China, just exploring the China solar PV market extensively. And if you can go, like what Christophe said, if you go into the report, you'll find extensively some research that we did on the Chinese market. And this is just going to be a summary of what was discovered. So like you said, in 2023 alone, China installed 216 gigawatts, 216.3 gigawatts, which now takes it the total capacity to 608. So you'll realize that China up until 2023, it had just installed just about 400 gigawatts in that space. And you can see from the trends on the graph on the right side, from 2015, we're talking, which is about just over 8 years ago, or just 8 years ago, China was installing basically about 10 gigawatts of solar PV per year. And you can see the growth that was happening between 2015 to 2018. And then 2019, 2020, we all know what happened with the lockdowns. And we could see that from 2021, 2022, there was significant growth in the solar PV deployment in China at that time, and also you can see that 2023 did spike quite extensively, which also can be attributed to some of the work that happens. As you might be aware, the deployment of solar will take anywhere between 1.5 to 3 years. Also, if you include the tendering process and the design process, the whole process that goes in there, it will take up to about 3 years. So we can see that these projects up until 2023, we are looking at projects that were being necessitated or initiated between 2021 and 2022 and being deployed in 2023, which now then takes the total capacity of non-fossil energy to 54% of China, which has an installed capacity or electricity capacity of about 2.92 terawatts. So we now have wind and solar accounting for of installed capacity 54% of that. So wind and solar amount to 1.05. We also have other elements. There is a graph. Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. There is a graph that can show the non-renewable energy, which is your core, or only accounting for about 57.6% of that, and the rest is going to solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear. And I think I specifically put this graph over here to just also demonstrate that 10 years ago, we were looking at a solar installed capacity of about 5 years in China. And within the years, now we see that by 2023, solar now accounts for about 21% of the installed capacity. One of the factors, one of the key drivers that we'll touch a bit later on is the political will and the political drive that happens in a country when you are trying to grow the green economy. And we have a statement here from President Xi Jinping from 2 years ago at the 75th UN General Assembly, where he said that the long-term goal is to achieve zero carbon neutrality or zero CO2 emissions by 2060. Moving on to that, I think specifically what was interesting was to take a deep dive into the history of what exactly happened in China in terms of enabling policy that happened in the past 23 years, or I think we looked up to 2000 to look at what were some of the policies that were pivotal to the growth of the solar market in China. And I think there is a lot that happened, but I think significantly you see that from 2005, there was the renewable energy law that came into place, which was quite significant in creating the enabling environment that saw the deployment of solar PV, not only on manufacturing for export purposes, but also manufacturing for self-consumption, leveraging on the domestic market to be able to grow the market, increase in terms of skills, increase in terms of the finance, and lowering the price for the system. So I'm just going to go on a tangent, just going through the policies that China implemented at the time. So we'll see that in 2005, they had the renewable energy law, which was the purpose of that was to create a framework that promotes development and utilization of renewable energy sources in China at that time. Just after that, we saw the state. So this is just basically some of the policies that were implemented. They are not in any specific order. I'm sure that there were some policies that were implemented in 2005, and then we also have the renewable energy law in 2005, and then you have the supervision of full amount purchase of renewable energy in 2007, and there are other laws that were enacted in 2006. So we're looking at something in 2007 where a policy was enacted that aimed to ensure that electricity generated from renewable source such as solar, wind, biomass would be fully integrated into the national grid. And moving forward, we can also see that We also had the Clean Energy of 2018, which aimed at increasing the use of clean energy, reducing curtailment, and improving the integration of renewable energy onto the grid. We can also attribute some of that development to the 5-year plan for renewable energy, where China sets renewable energy targets for each and every 5 years that that they will be going into. So in this time, we are in the phase of 2020 to 2025, and this plan outlines the goals and strategies to be implemented in the next 5 years. But I think what is going to be futuristic in terms of the policies that are looking into the horizon, we'll be looking at the notice of matters promoting renewable energy consumption. So basically looking at green energy certificates, which is there to facilitate energy trading, because as you might be aware, wheeling and energy trading is becoming the frontier for the next couple of years. So trying to promote market-oriented development and enhance transparency on energy trading. So that is something that we have seen that 2023 and 2024, and in 2024, we're seeing that there is a push to also still expand renewable energy capacity, despite solar being at about 600. I think the target was about 1.2 terawatts by 2025, but I see that China is already almost at 1.1 terawatts, which is almost like 2 years ahead of schedule. So that's basically the policy framework, which has not only seen the domestic market growing, but also reducing the prices, enhancing competition, and also improving the skills and innovation within the Chinese solar market, which is seen, which is by no coincidence that it is dominating the foreign market or the supply chain, which is as a result of some of the policies that were implemented locally that would also then grow the market. What is also peculiar is to see the share of distributed PV and centralized PV. The distributed PV, which would be behind the meter, and centralized, which would be being sold to the energy operators at that time. And you can see that there has been a tussle over the years in the past 5 years where domestic consumption has been growing, as well as you see the growth of the distributed projects, which now amount to 254. As compared to the centralized projects of 354, which we saw a law that was enacted in 2013, which seeks to enhance the competitiveness of centralized projects and also the private participation of renewable energy developers. We also saw that there are also just over 20 provinces with accumulated installed capacity of more than 10 gigawatts. As Christoph was already explaining, that some countries are barely struggling to hit the 10 gigawatt mark. And there are some provinces in the space in China that are already above 10 gigawatts. And some of the opportunities or the key drivers that are pushing that growth in that sector would be technological advancement and efficiency improvements, supply chain, manufacturing, finance, all those playing a part. We also have government policies and targets, so clear targets that are being set in the framework and hitting those. We also see green hydrogen project. I think what was interest of me as well is the demand side solutions or increasing efficiency and reducing carbon intensity of operation. I think one of the benefits as well, which has seen that growth, is job creation and skills development, which has been very key and alluded to several reports across the world on the importance of job creation and skills development. Some of the issues that are still yet to be addressed would be like the previous speaker was speaking about oversupply and supply chain issues. They are grid integration and curtailment, which is also still being addressed by several policies that have been enacted so far. I think it's almost a yearly thing where they come up with a different strategy to mitigate that. Obviously, solar being on the ground, land availability and usage conflicts are also going to be an issue, has been an issue, going to be an issue going forward. And as we might also know, international trade disputes and tariffs. So, right, I had a slide on policy recommendations. But yeah, anyway, I think this will be the end of my presentation. Here are our contacts at Global Solar Council, and I'll pass it back to you guys.
Thanks a lot, Collins. And yes, the policy recommendations will be touched upon in the Q&A with Sonia later.
Okay.
So
all right.
Thanks for guiding us through the very complex Chinese PV market, policy frameworks, challenges and opportunities, and some of the points you made also will be discussed later when it comes to global challenges and opportunities. So let's move on to the next section, which will be presented by myself. And let me check if I do have, yes, control of the slides. Yes, so the presentation from Collins looked at the China PV market, for which there's a dedicated chapter in the GMO. So if you have more questions or insights that you want to look at, you can check the report. What is not in the report, and we're presenting here today basically exclusively, is an overview of the European market. Since we are the European Solar PV Association, we wanted to give an overview of what's going on in the European continent. So most of the slides that I'm going to present today are related to Europe as a continent. Some of them are of the EU27. It is specified which is which, but please appreciate the difference. So to begin with, across the European continent, 2023 was also a spectacular year, reaching and surpassing 70 gigawatts of installed capacity. And if we look backwards, in 2021, the market expanded by over 30% to 32 gigawatts. In 2022, it grew by over 40%, reaching 46 gigawatts. And in 2023, it reached 70 gigawatts by growing by over 50%. So the solar renaissance is really taking place fully across the European continent, reaching new heights and growing to a completely different dimension, and largely outgrowing the first solar wave, which you can see in the graph, which took place at the beginning of the 2010s. For the first time ever, also, we have seen a national market that has installed more than 10 gigawatts. That is Germany, which has crossed 15 gigawatts, as Christoph mentioned this is in his presentation. And Germany alone was representative of 20% of the total European installation. There's been some movement in the largest markets, and further growth is on the horizon. But due to the high baseline that we reached this year, it won't be close to the volumes of growth that we have seen this year. If we look at the cumulative installed capacity, the solar fleet in Europe has crossed the 300 gigawatt mark in 2023, after it had crossed 200 only 2 years before. So the total operating fleet has doubled compared to 2019, when it had 150 gigawatt threshold reach, and tripled compared to 2016, when it had crossed the 100 gigawatt mark. Looking at the individual markets, Germany remains the largest, with about 83 gigawatts of operating capacity, is by far the largest. That's about 1/4 of the total capacity. The second place is switched now. Spain is the second largest, and Italy comes third with a bit more than 30 gigawatts. Looking at the top 10, first interesting insight is that 9 out of these 10 markets actually installed more than 2 gigawatts. So the baseline to become part of this top 10 club in Europe is getting higher and higher. Belgium made it with 1.9 at position 10, but all the others actually installed more than 2 gigawatts. Also, interestingly, we can see a good diversification, but also strong growth in certain markets. 4 out of these 10 markets actually grow by 100% or more within a single year. Those are Germany, Italy, Austria, and Sweden. So Germany, we already talked about the doubling of the market to an impressive 15 gigawatts installed in 2023, and 20% of the European total. And within the top 5, we have seen some movement. Spain has switched back to position 2, surpassed by Germany after a spectacular 2022. It grew, but only 5%, but that is due to the impressive level reached in 2022. Italy has also increased by 100% and took the top 3, whereas the rest has remained more or less stable. On the other hand, if we look at the VAT per capita, we can also see a quite different picture because across Europe, the size actually is quite relevant in making the total markets quite different from each other. But using this indicator, we are also able to compare the level of ambition without taking into consideration the population side. What stands out is that some of the largest markets by absolute numbers are also the largest when it comes to VAT per capita. Netherlands stands out with a total VAT per capita of basically 1.3 kilowatt per inhabitant, and Germany has also followed suit and is basically reaching 1,000 VAT per capita, or 1 kilowatt per capita for inhabitant. It's also interesting to see that there is some diversification also in the smaller markets. We are seeing in this chart some of the smaller markets that normally are not appearing in a top 10 list, like Estonia, Switzerland, or Luxembourg. And also that Europe is retaining a quite strong lead when it comes to VAT per capita, because outside of Australia, which is by far, not by far, but by a good margin, the largest still in the world, all the top 6 of this list also feature in the top 7 worldwide. If we look at the next 4 and 5 years, we expect further growth to take place in the European market, expecting a 10% annual growth and reaching 77 gigawatts of installed capacity by the end of the current year. So, as I was mentioning before, despite the high baseline that we reached in 2023, we do expect further growth to take place, albeit at a smaller rate. This will be followed by 4 years of two-digit growth in the range between 10 and 15%. And looking at the total installations, the total market in 2028, we expect to reach 122 gigawatts by 2028. What's also interesting is looking at when do we expect to reach the 100 gigawatts milestone. We expect that for the European continent in 2026. The main driver of growth in Europe is, of course, the European Union, but we'll see that in just a moment. So historically, the European Union has been the main contributor of European installed capacity, and in the past, it covered basically all of the market demand. Back in 2011, it was 95% of the continent's new installation. We have seen some more diversification taking place in recent years, because the share has decreased to 81% in 2023. The diversification supported by the growth of markets such as the United Kingdom, Turkey, Switzerland, and a few others. And we expect this to remain more or less stable in the coming 5 years. Looking at the European numbers versus the rest of the world, one important take is that Europe is growing to, or has grown to, a slower pace than the rest of the world average. And this is also expected to be the same in 2024. In 2023, Europe covered 19% of the total market of 447 gigawatts. And this share is expected under our medium scenario to decrease to 17%. Just to recap, we expect for 2024, 22% of global average annual growth compared to a 10% annual growth in Europe. In the medium term, we expect the share to remain somewhat stable, and in 2028, we expect Europe to cover 16% of the global annual market. And then with a final focus on the EU, we also compare our expectations with our previous report, the European Market Outlook, and our estimations have been somewhat inaccurate for 2023. We were actually a bit too cautious, and we landed 5 gigawatts above our expectations from December 2023. So the European Union landed at 61 gigawatts installed. That's also an extraordinary growth of 50% in the European Union. But if we look at 2024, we actually expect only 5% growth, so even lower than Europe as an average, at 64%. This is also increasing our forecast by a small margin, by 2 gigawatts compared to our previous publication. On the other hand, for the next 3 years, we slightly revised downwards our expectations, driven by a number of challenges, also due to the high baseline that we reached this year, but we have some clouds on the horizon that needs to be addressed if we want the European market to continue. So in short, we expect between 2025 and 2028, a low two-digit growth rate, which would land at 97 in 2028, which means that basically the European Union would basically reach the 100 gigawatt mark by the end of our 5-year period. So wrapping up, what's the larger perspective? We expect a global market to surge, and as a consequence, solar in the EU is expected to outpace European and national targets, going much above the National Energy and Climate Plan targets, which have been revised last year, and now at above 600 gigawatts of solar targets, collectively aggregated from national member states, and above the 700 gigawatt DC REPowerEU target, because our medium scenario projection to 2030 actually reaches basically 900 gigawatts by 2030. But this will not happen without adequate policy design. So we have a few points that we point the attention to. One is the topic of grids and flexibility, and this we can discuss in a moment with Sonia. We're talking about issues about storage, or the lack of adequate deployment of flexibility solutions, both in terms of electrification and both in terms of deployed flexibility capacity, such as battery storage. We're seeing issues of grid congestion and lack of adequate grid deployment, and also insufficient demand response. As a second block, we're also seeing issues in terms of permitting and land use. What we would like to see is clear, streamlined, and more stability when it comes to administrative procedures. And when it comes to skills, on the one hand, the lack of workforce has been somewhat eased, but that remains still a challenge, including for the administrative processes, because lack of staff is a big issue when it comes to regulation and permitting. And on the other hand, we do see still an issue when it comes to the business model for manufacturing in Europe. So with that, I stop, and I invite Sonia Dunlop, the CEO of the Global Solar Council, to join me for a final Q&A session to go through the policy recommendations that the GSC has provided for this GMO 2024. And my suggestion is to perhaps begin looking at the policy recommendations that you have been put together. I don't know if you can project them on the screen. Voila. Okay, so that's an overview of the policy recommendations that you kindly provided in our report. And maybe I would begin with the fact that it's the first time that you put the policy recommendations, and your first ask is about encouraging solar PV deployment across all market segments, and also setting national targets that match the right potential. So do you feel that government supports sufficiently solar innovation and new applications such as off-grid solar, agri-PV, BIPV, floating PV to unleash the solar potential in these countries?
Yeah, thank you, Rafael. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and for all of Solar Power Europe's work on the global market outlook, and indeed to all the national solar associations and partners who fed in their data, fed in their projections to make this publicly available global market outlook, especially the China Renewable Energy Association, who we partnered with very strongly, and who wrote the report, the chapter on China. Your question is, do I think governments are really encouraging PV across all the market segments? And I always say at the Global Solar Council, the World Solar PV Industry Association, we represent solar on land, on buildings, floating on water, and indeed on space, in space. And we lobby for a better policy framework for PV in space. But no, joking aside, so I think it is really important here to raise awareness of the versatility, the modularity, the scalability of our technology, which can be installed in small modules and solar lighting systems this big, or in 5 gigawatt solar farms in China and elsewhere. And to really emphasize that we need to make sure we're encouraging the deployment of solar across all those market segments, ground mount, rooftop, residential and commercial, industrial, floating, and off-grid, because we need to make sure that no country is left behind in the global solar transition, and we need to make sure that no individual human being is left behind in the global solar transition. And we must not forget that there are 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere around the world that do not have access to electricity, and we as the solar PV industry can absolutely transform their lives in allowing them energy access for the first time ever. So yes, I think often, governments think about solar as one block, don't think of it enough as breaking it down into the different sub-markets within solar PV deployment. And we definitely have to make sure that in every country we have policy for rooftop solar and ground mount solar and off-grid solar. And we as the Global Solar Council have on our website put some comparative analysis of policies for rooftop solar, for behind the meter solar, distributed solar, for about 15, 20 different countries as part of our Empowering People with Solar PV campaign. And we invite everyone in the world in the audience to go and look at that and to try and learn lessons and learn best practice from other parts of the world.
Thanks a lot. And your point about diversification across different geographies also is related to the next question I have for you. So we have learned from the outcome of the COP28 last year that we need $12 trillion to meet the triple up, double down target by 2030. And this investment needs to be better distributed across the planet. So what is the Global Solar Council doing to accelerate the pace for investment flows into solar, increase the scale, but also reach more geographies, those that are most in need?
Exactly. Yeah, Raffaele, that's absolutely right. There's good news and there's bad news, right? The good news is the world this year is going to be investing $500 billion just into solar. Last year, we invested just over $1 billion a day into PV. And so, in a way, that $12 trillion figure, that investment target for the end of the decade in order to achieve the tripling of renewables target and the doubling of energy efficiency, is not as crazy as it seems. However, the bad news is that, the vast majority of that money, about 85% of it, is going to essentially rich countries, OECD countries, developed markets, and not enough of it is going to the developing countries, to the non-OECD countries outside of the OECD and China. And we need to fix that. So we at the Global Solar Council, we've totally relaunched the organization, and we've launched a new strategy to address this. We're going to launch a new finance work stream to bring together the big global commercial investment banks and institutional investors, together with the global multilateral development banks who represent the public financial institutions, with the solar PV industry, to together identify what are the barriers to getting more low-cost finance and low-cost capital into solar in developing countries. How do we bring down the cost of finance for solar all over the world, but especially in those countries where the cost of capital remains high, and how do we address this imbalance? And we're going to do that by looking at contract standardization. The Open Solar Contracts Project did great work on this, and there's much that we need to update there. We're going to do that by looking at what risk guarantee mechanisms the public financial institutions can offer in order to make those projects more bankable, whether they be currency risks or counterparty risks or policy risks or other. And we're going to do that by also trying to do reports with IRENA and others to address the perception gap between the perceived risk and the real risk. And by doing all of that, and by working on the ESG issues in the sector, and by working on the bankability of the sector, we hope to really be able to bring down the cost of finance for solar projects, especially in developing countries, and make sure that finance flows really do align with the investment needs and the energy needs of people all over the world.
Thanks, and indeed the weighted average cost of capital ends up being the most impactful factor in determining the competitiveness of solar energy. Maybe moving on to the topics of flexibility and permitting. So this is something that we have also highlighted for Europe, and I noticed from the questions from the audience that the topic of remuneration of solar energy when it comes to issues such as cannibalization, for example, and negative hours could pose a challenge to the further growth of the sector. So what can you tell us on this regard?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the members of the audience asked a question about this. You know, he was basically saying all of these projections of growth are very well, but if we're at the bottom of the duck curve, if we're cannibalizing our own revenues, if power prices are zero or negative, then what are we going to do? And this is where flexibility and our kind of grid storage and flexibility campaign comes in. We need, in order to make sure that solar is properly integrated into the energy systems all over the world, we need to be encouraging the rollout of storage, and that's both short-term storage in terms of batteries and lithium-ion batteries, but also long-term storage in terms of pumped hydro and green hydrogen and all the other long-term storage technologies that are emerging. We need a good mix of renewables in every country, because after all, you know, geothermal and others and wind can balance out solar. There's a perfect inverse correlation between solar and wind across the day and night and across seasons. We need more interconnections across regions, between countries. We need more demand response, more electrification, more dynamic pricing in electricity markets, fundamentally more market design reform, in order to make sure that we are really seeing the levels of solar grid integration that we need. And we at the Global Solar Council are going to do a report on this next year. We call it the grid challenge because the challenge is that essentially we aren't able to connect to the grid fast enough. We aren't being given grid connections large enough, but the solution is flexibility. And flexibility comes in many different forms, and we need to be learning from best practice from one part of the world to the other. Brazil has only just put in place a policy framework for storage. Other countries are also copying the good practice in the US in that area. You know, there are initiatives in India, the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, to connect across the Indian subcontinent and across to the Gulf, to use also the time zone differentials between different regions of the world to the advantage. When the sun is high in India or the Gulf, you know, demand is high elsewhere. And working with equivalents of those, such as the Chinese Global Energy Interconnection Cooperation Initiative, in order to really deliver the flexibility that we need. But flexibility obviously is very much a developed country question. In many parts of the world, such as in sub-Saharan Africa, where solar is largely used as a backup to the grid in times of blackouts, when that's really what's driving deployment in Zimbabwe. Reference to Collins, obviously, my colleague who just spoke, but also in off-grid areas, you know, the challenges are completely different, and there it's about solar home systems and mini grids really replacing the need for grid build-out at all.
Thanks a lot. Maybe moving to your last policy recommendation in this chart on the right, it's about skills. So we know that no other power generation is as job intensive as solar, meaning that no other power generation provides as many jobs as solar. So what's your take on job creation? How can we ensure that the workforce is available and we do continue to create employment worldwide? What are your activities on that front?
Absolutely. There are 5 million people who work in solar PV already. So all of you in the audience can know that you're part of a workforce the size of a small country. We are the most jobs-rich, jobs-intensive of all the renewables. Investing in solar is investing in jobs in your local area, in your local country. Every single solar panel that is installed, whether that be on land, water, or on roofs, has to be installed with a pair of human hands. So what we as the Global Solar Council have to do is make sure that those human hands have been properly trained, have kept safe with proper health and safety standards, and have the ability to upskill where they need to. So we have launched the Global Solar Training Standards Initiative, the STSI, and we're looking for companies to sponsor this and get involved to create a global suite of training modules that will be farmed out to training centers all over the world, anyone who wants to participate, so that we have a global standard in terms of when someone goes to build a utility scale solar farm, for example, we know they have been trained under the STSI, and the investor knows that, and the EPC knows that, and the developer knows that, and everyone is trained to the same standard to keep our workers safe and to make sure that we're building quality installations to the right specifications every single time. And so that's what we've set up. And here we are really learning from the wind industry, actually, who went through this process about 10 years ago and have a very good system in place to do this. And we are now at the stage in terms of our development that we in PV have to do the same. But we can't do that without the technical expertise of all the companies in the sector, especially the EPCs. And so we really need you to get in touch. We also, of course, need to make sure that we have the workforce there available in order to install the almost the 7.4 terawatts total installed capacity that we're expecting by 2030. And by the way, as the Global Solar Council, I can pledge right now that when we do get to 2 terawatts, when we do get to a terawatt global market per year in 28, 29, that we will hold a huge party to celebrate, because it really will be a huge milestone. But we need to make sure that we have the right, that people around the world who are currently working as construction workers or electricians or roofers, in the roofing industry, have the ability to upskill and train themselves and enter the solar workforce as well, all over the world where we're expecting the deployment. And for that, we will be working with the IEA and IRENA and other partners in order to make sure that we have some kind of workforce planning at national, regional, and at global level.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned this once more, the annual terawatt per year market as a milestone and a party to celebrate for. We look forward to that to happen sooner than later. But that maybe can be my last question, since we are towards the end of the hour. In summary, what do you think is key to be fixed to reach a terawatt annual market before 2030?
Yeah, I mean, it will be such a milestone moment. I think, if we can fix that finance challenge in terms of lowering the cost of finance in developing countries around the world, if we can fix the flexibility challenge, and if we can fix the global skills challenge, and if we can ease some of the geopolitical tensions around solar and some of the trade tensions around solar, then we will be ready to fly as an industry. We are the fastest growing source of electricity in history. We are the leading renewable energy technology. We are moving to a world where solar PV is the center at the heart of energy systems, not just on the periphery. We are the one technology who can help deliver 1.5 or 2 degrees of global warming that are keeping that goal within reach. We are driving the energy transition. And so if we can just fix these last few problems, then we can really fly as a technology and as a solution to the climate emergency and the energy transition emergency. And I really urge everyone who wants to get involved at global level in the debate at COP, at the G7, at the G20, at the global challenges that are facing us in terms of finance and so on, to get involved with the Global Solar Council, obviously one of the partners on the Global Market Outlook report, and help us solve these issues from the bottom up and from the top down.
Sonia, thank you very much for the very interesting discussion. I see that we are at the end of the webinar period, so I would like to thank you and all the other guests speakers for contributing to this successful webinar. And I would also like to thank all the attendees for staying with us for the full hour. It's the closing of the webinar, so thanks for being there. You will receive an email with the recording and the slides, which will be sent to your email shortly. Please also be aware that members of Solar Power Europe also get exclusive access to the data sets that comes together with the free 2024 GMO report. And with that, let me close and thank you again for your participation. Have a good day.
Solar is now a mainstream source of energy in many countries across the globe, bringing clean energy, jobs, economic opportunities, and energy security. But we're nowhere near its full potential. As the united voice of the solar industry worldwide, the Global Solar Council has transformed our brand to represent a renewed vision for the future. A symbol of hope, optimism, global ambition, reflecting our commitment to support the solar industry and build a cleaner, more just world. Working with our members, we're here to make solar energy accessible for all. We're here to change the world. Our passion motivates us to drive the industry forward, to be a unifying voice, shaping policy, building markets, advocating for our members, working as a community to ensure that everyone's voices are heard. With clean energy ambition at an all-time high, now is the time for action. Now is the time for progress. Join us as we help build a fair and sustainable world with solar at the heart of a new energy economy.